You are now listening to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Niko Nicolaides.
How's it going, Rob?
It's going all right, man. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do professionally?
Right on. So, I'm a 23-year-old dude living out of Metro Detroit, and I'm a full-time bladesmith. I make knives for galleries, retailers, chefs all around the world. Just making tools out of steel for people to use in their kitchen, pretty much.
I have to ask, where did the
Yeah.
fascination for making knives come from? Did you just get bored one day? Were you like me watching a 2 a.m. knife commercial?
No, so I think it goes back way far, and it starts more with like medieval stuff. I've always had a fascination, like everyone has their thing when they're a kid, like dinosaurs, astronauts, whatever it is. Mine was like medieval times.
Yeah, we're
So I
talking we're
love the idea.
talking giant claymores, we're talking things of this sort, the stuff you see out of a Skyrim video game.
Exactly. We're talking big difference from what I make, but I've always had that fascination with how those tools are made, those how swords and stuff are art. And when it came time for me to like, well, knives, I worked in restaurants throughout high school and college. I worked full time going to school. So I learned how to sling a knife on a prep table for 8 hours a day. When it came to making knives, it was a fascination of like, okay, I've seen these videos on YouTube. I was going to school for manufacturing at the time, so I knew how to make shit already. And I figured I'd try it out. And it started off like I wanted to make folding knives and like the very tactical EDC stuff.
The more
And I realized
common
that,
stuff.
yeah, the more like the stuff you'd find in people's pockets, but like yeah, I came to the realization like that's not very feasible in the little shed I'm working out of now. So I turned a barbecue grill into a little forge and started beating away on a piece of metal. And it over the last I've been doing this now almost coming up on 5 years. Over the last 5 years, it's just grown from banging on a piece of steel on the floor to now I have a decently outfitted shop that has a bunch of different tools.
What would you consider the most important part of a blade, though? Because I feel like every knife maker that I've talked to so far, and especially a
hmm
fascination with it with all people, people like the shiny aspect of the blade, but sometimes I say it's a nice handle as well.
Yeah, so it's specifically for like my line of knives, what I make is chef knives. I think ergonomics, specifically the handle and how everything flows together. So like it can look cool as hell, but if it sucks to hold and it feels weird when you're cutting, it's a shit knife in my opinion. So I want something that feels good in the hand, feels good when you're cutting. So yeah, to me the most important would be like handle ergonomics and just overall flow. Like it should feel like a part of your body when you're using it.
I just started thinking of like watching Scream, and then you're in the background, and all you see is the dude go to stab somebody, and the knife breaks, and you're just like, it's
Yeah,
because your handle, man. The blade was
because
too.
it handles shit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's one of
exactly, man.
those. It's one of those dollar store knives, man.
Those knockoffs, bro. Nothing good. But
What
yeah,
would
it's
what would you consider you put the quality into your knives? Like, what would you consider that you focus on more? Now, were you just talking about the handles in general, just the
mm,
idea behind it? I think people like the aesthetic appeal of knives as well.
yeah, exactly. So that handle that ergonomic stuff is always in my mind. That's the main focal point. But what I've been working on a lot lately is more of the artistic creative side, more for my own pleasure. Um, Developing very different mosaic patterns and stuff that kind of catches the eye that is pleasing to most people, and that's fun for me to make. Because I mean, if I make the same knife that's just satin finish carbon steel blade, while that's a perfectly good tool, it gets kind of boring after a little while, and I want to spice it up a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what about the creative ideas that I might have thought of? Like immediately, if I start thinking about making a knife, dude, I'm trying to think of something that's going to be like badass. It look like a shark took a bite out of it. So like when you cut something,
Yeah.
It's going to cut multiple things at once, not just one quick slice.
Right, right. So I like with making Damascus. You said you talked to a couple other knife makers. I'm sure you have a little bit of the idea of how the steel is made. What I like to do is try and figure out how I can manipulate the steel to look what I want. So I've done stuff that has like a helical look, so it looks kind of like DNA or like a weaving pattern. I've done stuff that looks like dragons and demon looking things on a blade. I like the idea of trying to paint a picture with the steel I'm putting together and then turning that into like a cohesive piece.
Yeah,
If
more
that
like
makes
not really used for tactical purposes, but on the
uh,
aspect of also decoration. I think that's why,
yeah, exactly.
like, if anybody is a fan of Japanese culture or anything medieval, you have like a flail or some shit hanging in your house. You want it to look
Right.
nice and eye attractive as well. Like where someone walks by is like, is that a motherfucking samurai sword above your piano? Be like, yes, it is.
Hell yes it is. And it looks pretty dope. Yeah, so I want something that, can pop, can catch the eye, and that just has some kind of representation of like unique artistic touch. Because like I can make a pattern a bunch of different ways and it'll come out different every time. And to me, that's really cool to just have everything be unique in its own way.
Yeah, because I mean, just the process of trying to understand it too, like just looking at it though, reminds me of like with the samurais or anybody back in like ancient history that used to actually like use a certain tool all the time. What they would do is they would carve lettering into the side of it. How many times you
Right.
see like a Bruce Lee movie or something where somebody has a samurai sword, they pull it out and it says like the chosen one on the side of the blade, but it's written in Japanese lettering, so it's okay.
Right, yeah, it's that kind of that artist stamp, that kind of significant, like something signifying that that blade is different and pretty fucking badass.
How did you figure that you wanted to go towards that direction with just making more detail and more of a decorative design onto the blade?
Personal challenge, honestly. It's it gets more complicated the deeper you try to dive into creating patterns, and I like to try and challenge myself and give myself a tough time in the shop. Um, So with these patterns, it takes twice, three times as long, but the end result I think is way more badass than what I could do otherwise. So it's just me trying to figure out what I can make and really pushing my creative and um, you know, the bounds of what I can physically do in the shop to come up with these pieces.
Would you say that most of the stuff that you sell is more just as a decorative piece rather than actual use? Because I feel like after you create a knife like this, especially with such intricate design on the blade, I mean, it looks like I just took a hit of acid and just started staring at a piece of metal. Like it's
Yeah.
literally so many different swirls and designs onto it. I feel like when you get done with it, it's better just to show off rather than really use in any like cutlery or anything like that.
Sure. I think that really depends on the end customer. So, from my aspect, I always design each piece to be used in the end. I want a functional tool because you don't want to pay, a few $100 for something that can't work if you want it to. Um, but it comes down to whoever's buying it. I've had people that buy them just for like a collection that they have other nice knives and they want something of mine to add to their collection. Then I have guys that I know are gonna use their knife on a kitchen line all day long. Um, it really depends on what the person wants to do with it because like ultimately once I send it off to them, it's up to them what they do. They can hang it up or they can run it on their cutting board. Um, I'd like them to use it. Honestly, that's what I make them for, but to each their own.
If I had the ability to make blades like this, I mean, the first thing, I mean, you probably thought of it too. I would make something from medieval times. I don't know how you have not done it yet. First thing, I'd be
Fear.
forging a samurai sword for sure.
Yeah, pure fear is why I haven't done it. It's something you'd want to do, at least for me, that I'd want to do as close to um accurate as possible. And it's so hard to wrap my mind around it. I make knives that are, maximum 10, 11 inches in length. When we're talking samurai sword, we're looking at like 26 to 32 inches of blade. That's crazy uh, for me to wrap my mind around. I've got some stuff planned this year that I haven't done before, some like daggers, short sword stuff. But the katana's gonna wait, I think, for a little while longer. But yeah, it's super enticing. You know, you see all this stuff in anime and medieval times, and it's like all these big, brutal swords. Like, oh, that'd be so cool to have one. And then you try and sit down and like, oh, that's not. I don't know how to do that.
Would you say a lot of your inspiration just for the ideas that you create kind of come from just your influence, like with anime or something like that? Because I feel like a lot of the times I'm watching, Naruto and they pull out the shurikens or something. I'm like, fuck, you know how awesome it would be to engrave lettering on the side of that?
Right. Yeah. I think I have had stuff come from like I'll be watching something and some kind of pattern or some kind of something catches my eye. I'm like, that'd be cool as shit. Because most of my stuff isn't lettering or engraving. It's more of manipulation of like layers. So I want to see how I can make stuff flow. So when I see stuff that like light that bends weird ways or like very different geographical features, I want to see how I can mimic that flow into a blade. But I definitely have like ideas like I want to do something that looks like a laser beam coming out of a blade, or like explosions or lightning. All that kind of stuff is it's very the inspiration flow for me is very weird. It's very sporadic and it comes from like whatever catches my eye.
Yeah, dude, it immediately reminds me of when every time I used to walk into like a gas station and they were selling like rainbow brass knuckles off to the side. You're like,
Right.
what's that over there by the taquitos? And they're like, oh, those are
Yeah.
rainbow brass knuckles. I'm like, what are we
What?
doing?
Hell yeah. I don't need those, but that seems pretty dope. Yeah, yeah.
I don't need
No,
this
it's
the indigestion from the taquito. I'll take the knife.
I'll take the knuckles and the knife. Yeah, man.
With just knife making in general, though, like what's one thing that you're really kind of want to create, but you're afraid to do? Like I know we're talking about katanas and stuff. Do you have one idea where you're like, fuck, I really want to do this at one point?
Yeah, so the one I'm working up how to figure out now is I want to do like a medieval short sword like dagger, um, but put a twist on it that has like some non-traditional feel and flow. Just like a real maybe like an 18-inch sword, but a real thick blade that kind of comes out of a crazy angular tough looking guard, and just like a simpler handle to kind of tie it all together. But that one that's like trying to wrap my brain around has been tricky lately. uh, but that's I think that's the one that's daunting enough that I want to take it on very soon. Like you have to run that line of like this scares me but also I'm super excited to try this, and I think that's the one that's piquing me right now.
I held a replica of Thor's hammer.
Oh shit,
So
nice.
the way I could describe it to anybody was if you grabbed like a 60 or 70-pound dumbbell, something that's pretty heavy to where it kind of leans forward in your hands, and you just
Hmm.
held that with one hand. Like it was heavy, but like enough to where you could muster up the strength to pick it up, where it seemed like it should be a little bit lighter, but the feeling of it though, like when you have a blade, when you have a hammer, when you have a sword, anything in your hands, you want it to be comfortable too. I think that's a lot of
Yeah.
problems when people try and replicate older antique stuff. Like, my buddy has a dragon blade. Basically what it is, it's a like maybe 10-inch blade.
Okay.
It's about has a weird like dragon hand as the handle, but when you hold it, it's so unfucking comfortable that you don't want to ever use it. So it just looks for decoration. I'm like,
It's just
it's
it's
not.
just show, yeah.
Yeah, but I think the awesome part about it is, yeah, it's awesome to have it hanging and it looks awesome in your room or something. But I want to be able to also be like, hey, want to cut something, and then be able to like chop something, or your juice box in your room. You're sitting there drinking a juice box, the straw breaks. You're like, fuck it, grab the knife and just pop a hole in that.
Punch a hole. Yeah, that reminds you like you want yeah, whatever you want to make, you want it to be kind of functional. Like back in high school, I went to a tech school in high school because I was not the best student, so I had to figure out a way that I could occupy my class time. So I went to a school where I studied like engineering, manufacturing stuff. And while I was there, we took maybe like a week to cut out like three or four big pieces of metal to make a mace out of. So like a big six flange mace with just an all steel handle. And it was cool as hell to use, but you couldn't grab it because it was all steel. It was so heavy and everything was sharp on it. Like, yeah, we smashed some watermelons, but I was also worried about taking off my fingers and gouging my wrists. So I get where you're coming from with the dragon. Like, you want something that's cool to look at, but you could probably use it if you needed to.
Well, it's like, what's the one thing you do when you're bored and you have nothing to do all day? You basically go outside and start cutting shit up.
Right.
There's literally a line of YouTube channels that are just giant people cutting open watermelons, bottles, everything with samurai swords. I'm like, this is the audience we all want to be. This is the inner self of us all when it comes down to just grabbing a giant ass samurai sword and slicing something in half.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's the dream. It is the dream to just be able to cut things at all times of the day for no particular reason. To just chop through some stuff.
What's your first knife story? Like, what tell me about getting your first knife. Everybody remembers that day.
Okay. So I don't getting my first knife, I don't remember particularly, but I have a story of like what probably set it in for me for like swords and stuff. Um our family for some reason has a couple swords that all my uncles have that are like family crest insignia swords. Super weird. I don't get why. We're Mexican. We don't use English swords. But we have these swords and like a 4-year-old, I'm looking at these swords. I'm like, oh man, that's as big as I am, and I can't pick that up. So I'm just gonna look at it. And at one point, they handed it to me for me to pick it up, and I remember holding this sword like brass gold handle, long shiny blade, and I felt holding it like two hands, all my strength. I'm like, this is the most badass I've ever felt, and I can't let go of this feeling. Like it was just dope. It was just something that like that still sticks with me. And I remember whenever I would go over there, it'd be like, yo, can I pick up the sword again? And it'd be something cool uh that is just stuck with me. So like now I have one of those swords in my room. Um, so that's kind of my first like what kept me enthralled in the idea of like swords and knives.
There's just a primal thing about it, I think. It's the fact that when you have a blade in your hands, it seems like you have way more power or you're more threatening than if you have a gun.
Yeah, exactly. It's yeah, because the guns for me don't do anything. I'm actually like kind of not. I'm not into guns. Like I understand them. They're cool. But I am semi afraid of like holding a gun. To me seems more dangerous than holding a sword, which seems more like empowering.
Well,
If
this
that makes
brings up
sense
the
to
whole
you.
debate on the fact that the gun, first of all, is not as personal as a knife. Like if you're going to stab somebody, not saying go out there and do it, but if you're going to
Right.
stab someone, that's personal shit. We had a
Sure. You
thing
have
in our
yeah.
we had a thing in our town happen. I think it was like 5 years ago. It was around the time bath salts were getting really, really crazy.
Mm.
Like when we first started hearing about people eating other
Yeah.
people's faces and shit.
People going a little wild. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember because I was playing Dead Island, so it was like right around that time. It was like, oh shit, what is happening? Is it me playing this video game causing people to eat other people's faces? And my dad's like, no, they're just dumb and they're eating or smoking bath salts. I'm like, oh, okay.
They're on wicked drugs.
I
Yeah.
didn't know you can get drugs at Bed Bath and Beyond, but all right. And there was this incident that happened. We get a lot of tourists that come to our town where we had over hundreds and hundreds of tourists. I mean, way more than that, probably thousands that come down here. But we had a few hundred people that were involved in gangs come down here.
Oh
And
wow.
there was a report I read the next day that a woman had gotten killed on the boardwalk. And I was like, whoa, the boardwalk, like there's carnival games and people walk that thing with their families and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what happened? Someone got stabbed 46 times.
What the fuck? That's like
That's when I mean a knife is a fucking personal thing, because if you're going to sit there and stab the shit out of someone 46 times, everyone's like, it's a gang thing. I'm like, yeah, that shit had to be personal. You don't just sit
oh
there and be
yeah.
like, oh, give me your
No.
wallet and just sit there stabbing them the whole time.
No, yeah, you had to have some kind of reason to do that for because it takes a minute to do that. Like it's not a quick thing. Uh so yeah, that's fucking crazy. But I don't know. Yeah, a knife is more personal and you have to get up in there and really really do the job if you want to, but it's
Now we're sounding like psycho
now we
killers.
sound like psychopaths that are kind of morbid, but it's not that. It's just
Look,
that it's
everybody
that
watches true crime. Come on, don't be like that.
Nah, yeah, I get what you mean. No, we have stuff in Detroit. Like Detroit's not safe, but you don't hear about like too many. It's mostly gun violence. which is probably why I don't fuck with it too much. But
You would think though that a knife would be a better option only because a gun's just so loud it draws attention.
exactly, you draw attention to yourself, and it's anybody can hear it, and you leave evidence with guns. There's like bullets, there's casings, all that shit.
We're turning this into like a what's a better way to kill somebody
We're
podcast.
yeah, the better way to murder with Niko and Rob. No, that's
Do you want the nice handcrafted blade or with a nice beautiful handle accent to it to really drive it into your competitor? So I do
Yeah.
have to say though, why have you not created an Assassin's Creed blade?
I don't play video games that much. I never
Do you know
played
what
Assassin.
Assassin's Creed
I
is?
do. Yeah, I do. I know what Assassin's Creed is. I have no connection to it. Like, so there's nothing about it to me that's like, oh yeah, I really need a blade from Assassin's Creed. Like I'm familiar with like the wrist blade thing and the swords he has, but it's like I'm good. Like I don't have that familiar connection to it where it's like, yeah, that'd be something cool for me to have in my room, like hang it up and be like.
Do you like the creative aspect though of the idea of having a blade attached to your wrist? I find like those ideas are just insane.
I think it's dope on a mechanical aspect and like uh that hidden weapon thing, because wasn't isn't the whole thing it was made by like uh shit.
Well, it's made by made by blacksmiths, but they ended up evolving it into like an ancient ancestral item. But you have to
Mhm.
cut off your third finger to be able to use the blade, at least in the beginning.
Oh wow.
And then it just kind of became like a tradition. But I always kind of just wondered this, just with the fact like there are so many creative things. Like I've seen a dude had a sword with a gun in it, like a flintlock pistol.
Oh yeah, those are still a common thing today. Like with I go to a bunch of shows for custom bladesmiths and just these big, like different than your gun and knife shows. These are more high end or like custom unique makers. But there's guys that still make those today where they'll have very ornate um 3 to 6 shot revolvers with a blade crafted around it. It looks fantastic as hell. I'll try and find a picture later of like ones that are made by quality bladesmiths, but they're super cool items. It's
What would you say would be the craziest thing that you've learned or you've seen going to one of these conventions, though? Because I know a few knife makers and I've seen the knife conventions as well. And when I go in there, I
hmm,
find my eyes just glazing over at all the creative designs that people craft out.
yeah, it's a lot to take in when you go. So for me, I like unique kind of construction. So the patterns, if you can figure out a pattern, like you can make it go however which way you want. While I do appreciate cool patterns, I like blades that are constructed in very unique ways. So like all the pieces fit together and can be taken on and off, and everything fits up the same. Everything's very ornate, and it's got this next level of um, craftsmanship to it. It's like a gun where you take it apart, you clean it, everything has its place, and it's super unique in that way. But I also like the pieces like my knives are integral, which means the blade, the section that goes connected to the handle and inside the handle is all one piece. It's all made from one piece of steel. There's people that do that kind of construction with bigger fighting knives. So like the guard, what protects your hand, those two little protrusions are all forged from like the same piece. Uh, I just think that aspect, when you find a blade that's done really well like that, is probably what catches my eye the most.
Dude, you got to make a fucking Swiss Army blade. And what I mean by saying that is like you screw off the freaking, let's say you have a wide variety of blades. Like, you know how everyone has the pill containers that say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Switch them up for each day of the
yeah, you
week.
got a blade for each day of the week, sure. But let's say instead you just detach from the handle the what you call your walking blade, which is like it's about the size of your maybe like your palm or something you can carry around with you. Then you go into like, oh, this is my cutting blade, and you attach a fucking giant chef's knife to it. And then
Yeah.
we Swiss Army blade. Hey, let's say we'll put a wrench on that sucker, or we'll put a screwdriver on that sucker. Be like, it's a knife for every occasion.
Yeah. A little bit of everything. It's a multi-tool. It's a multi-tool that you have to switch out every time you want to use it.
Well, that's
But it's badass.
That's what a knife
It's
is,
badass.
though. A knife is meant to be used for so many different scenarios, so many different occasions, too. I mean, common you see
Definitely.
with knife makers, they're making them for either hunters or they're making them for cutlery people. Who have you found so far
Sure.
just with your knife making that is a little bit out of that range?
My demographic is mostly chefs, people looking for cutlery. I haven't found people that really want something super unique in that aspect. Um, every now and then I will get someone that's looking for like a karambit, those ring hook knives, um, but that never goes through because they don't want to pay more than $50 for a knife. But it's like it's yeah, my demographic that I built through Instagram is mostly like chefs, chef knife users or people that just like pretty knives, it feels like, and other knife
And they're
makers.
commissioning you for making like a cutlery use item, but with like a probably a finer blade to it. Not really the blade, but more of the handle. Like, hey, I want a regular chef's knife, but I want the handle to be exotic. I want it to be or different so I can kind of carry it around and be my own personal knife to use in the kitchen.
Yeah, sure. It's different for everyone. So I'll have people that really just let me come up with whatever I want. They're just looking for a certain size of knife. They're looking for like your generic 8-inch chef knife, and they're like, yeah, just like have fun with it. Make what you want. And then I'll have other people that are very specific where they want a very certain handle color, the pattern to look a very specific way, the size and shape of the knife is like all this and that they want. It really depends on the kind of customer. Like everyone's different when it comes to something that they want. You know what I mean?
Would you say that like how do you read a customer? How are you able to tell? Do you just ask a couple questions and then try and create your own kind of perspective on what it should be?
Yeah, pretty much. So if the customer has a very clear idea in mind, they'll usually open up with that. They're like, I want this size knife with these kind of handle materials and this and that. I'm like, okay, cool, we can make that work. Sounds like you have an idea of what you want. And then you'll have people that don't really have anywhere to start from. They're like, I want a new bread knife or I want a new chef knife. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Do you have a color handle you're drawn to? Do you have a preference between like a carbon steel blade or a patterned blade? And from there, we work together to kind of find out what works best for them. Most people at this point now trust me on my judgment for what looks good together, which I appreciate because it gives me a little bit of creative freedom in each piece that I make. Uh, but it's a game every time. There's definitely people I can read from the beginning that aren't serious about what what they're gonna get into with working with me, um, and those usually end pretty quick. But most of the time, I can read the customer pretty well.
Would you say that it's the more of the beauty aspect that kind of attracts a lot of people to your page as well? I feel like as soon as someone sees like a weird like zebra striped knife or something, they immediately go like, "Holy shit, what is this?"
Yeah, it's 100% it is. Because most of them are just like pictures. I haven't lately done any videos of like cutting or testing or even like making the knives. I haven't done a whole lot of process stuff. I get carried away in the shop just zoning in on work. So yeah, a lot of the stuff that draws people to my page would have to be, excuse me, would have to be purely the aesthetics of my knives, like the bold contrast, the different designs and stuff would be what draws them in.
Now, if you had to tell me your worst knife experience, what was it? I've cut myself with a fucking kitchen knife. I've cut myself with a spoon, so I'm pretty sure you probably have a story.
I've got some bad ones. Yeah, honestly, the worst thing I had hasn't happened from making knives. I was doing some work as like a teenager. I was working with like a box cutter, doing some work, either opening something or trying to get something open. and the box cutter got jammed. And I just kept pulling on it to try and get it out, holding underneath where the knife was, like a dumbass. And it slips, goes through whatever I was cutting, and then halfway through my thumb. So my left thumb has a scar that goes pretty much halfway around it. And I cut down to the bone and almost cut my tendon in half. So I had to go and get my thumb sewn back together, my tendon sewn back together. That's probably the worst one. That was pretty gnarly.
Man, I haven't had anything like that. I mean, I get the average like deep cut or something where you're like, oh, it's not that bad. Next thing you know, like a minute later, it's gushing out so much blood. You're like,
It's oozing.
it's a delayed reaction.
Right, that's how I felt. Like it slipped in. I'm like, oh, that didn't hurt. And then I see white, like the bone. I'm like, oh, that's not
I don't
good.
think a lot of
It's
people
like,
understand
what?
how fucking sharp box cutters are.
Oh, dude, they're crazy thin. It is just like a piece of paper made out of metal, meant to cut
I used to
stuff.
work at
They're
a fucking
super sharp.
grocery store, and they're like, "Oh, once the blade gets down to a little bit, you have to replace it or something." I'm like, "Oh, so it's nothing. It's not gonna freaking hurt me if it cuts me." Fucking one day, I'm cutting open a box, and I like went straight into my hand. I just look over, and I'm like, "That's deep as shit," and it burns,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's on like the tip of your finger too. So everything you're touching is on fire, and then you're just like, "All right, I'm just dragging
Oh
blood all over the store at this point."
yeah. It doesn't. Sorry, that was an alarm. Yeah, it doesn't feel good. I most of my accidents in the shop now are like burns. I get burns all over my hands and my fingers. Like my right hand is like it looks speckled from all the little burns I get. But like you're saying, like cutting the tips of your finger. If you ever burn the tip of your finger really bad on something, it hurts to touch stuff for a while. Like touching with really sensitive like pads of your finger sucks. And then it goes like numb too. It's not fun.
How often do you get burned? I mean, I think what
Uh
you messaged me before, which is kind of why I thought, especially before about the medieval thing, was the forage. Like
yeah.
people don't call it that. Surprisingly, a lot of people usually use like, "Oh, I'm next to my whatever fire. I'm next to this or something." You said forge. I'm like immediately I picture an anvil and I picture a hammer and I picture these types of things. But a lot of people do not know what a forge is. They picture like an oven or like a stove that you shove in a fucking pizza.
Right, yeah, I have to explain it to people all the time. They think it's like a kiln, which is kind of it's the same in like temperature concept, but different in the way it works. But I get burned on the daily. I got a really bad burn yesterday. I'll probably get a couple more today. But yeah, my forge is it's essentially like a small oven concept. It's just lined with a lot of high temp insulation to hold up to like 2300 degrees. It won't deteriorate. And it's just a jet. It's a propane jet that goes into this small cylindrical oven that just keeps my steel really hot and heats it up really quick. Whereas a kiln can get really hot as well, but it heats it up a lot more slowly because it's like radiant heat, if that makes sense.
It does. Now, when it comes to
Okay,
though
cool.
the aspect of like you're saying, you're getting burns all the time, that doesn't deter you from making any more knives. It seems like after a couple burns, I don't want to ever make anything like pancakes or hot pockets, especially
No,
fuck hot pocket.
no, you get used to it. It's just like a thing now. Like I'll be surprised if I'm like forging and doing some work and I don't get burned. Like, but the hands, it's not bad. The wrists, like the arm area, it's not bad. It's like the surprising ones that hurt and suck. Like you'll get a little piece of metal that flies off and like gets the back of your neck. That one sucks. I've got stuff around my lip and mouth before. Those don't feel good. And then like your first instinct is like to lick it. Like there's something on your mouth. Oh, lick it, get it away. No, you don't want to lick hot metal that's stuck to your face. Like
Hey,
those,
I'm that
yeah.
guy that wants to do that, you know? Maybe the pole
Well, you
outside,
learn real.
you tell me it's
Yeah.
cold or something, I'm gonna stick my tongue on it because I
Oh
have a
yeah. You want to learn. You want to
I
figure it
have a
out.
problem with authority, damn it.
But you learn real quick, like, oh, you lick a 900 piece or 900-degree piece of metal, it doesn't feel good. It only takes once.
Now I do say this because a lot of with the medieval stuff too. How often do you name your knives?
So I don't name my knives per se, but I do if I come up with a pattern that I haven't seen before, I'll name a pattern. Um, just for like ease of reference for people. And when it's something super specific that I haven't really seen before, like a little bit of a point of pride, like, yeah, I feel like I created this pattern, or like I haven't seen this done before. Like, I'm gonna name it what I want to. Um, and that's where more of the naming and like the significant thing comes into play. Like each knife I make doesn't really have a name. It's just a knife most of the time. I'm not super sentimental with them, but for like the mosaic pieces that take a lot longer, um, that have a pattern that I kind of created for them, I'll name them, and those ones mean a little bit more in the end.
Why do you think people are so fascinated with knives? I like to think it's because it's just the bad attitude, I would say, just with just carrying one around. I mean, I've seen so many people that look like cowboys and they're wearing like a fucking knife on the side of their hip that's like the length of their leg. And I'm like, what is that for? And they're like, it just makes me look tough. And I'm like, oh,
It's just a flex. Yeah. I think it's different for everyone. You have people that use their knives for a living, right? So mostly my clientele uses knives for a living, and they want something to kind of flex on the person next to them, maybe, but they also want something that'll kind of last forever. But I think knives in general, it's just we're drawn to them because it's pretty much one of the first tools created by man, being rocks. But like a sharp rock can get a lot of work done. You're like, oh, that's a dope tool. Like I want to have one of those. And as time progresses, like, oh, we have bronze knives now. That's dope. We need one of those. And now we're at the point where like knives are very much art that you can collect and own and make one unique for yourself. It's like, okay, that's definitely something I have to have now.
that's why I would name every knife I have. I name them all.
I'm sure they have been named by people. I just don't personally name
If
them.
you get a
It's not.
fucking knife that's double-sided, so it's like the thing from Star Wars, like Darth Maul has or something, there's no
Yeah.
way you're not naming that.
Oh yeah, if I went wild, I'd definitely have to name it. It'd have some weird name too. But yeah, for most of my knives, they're just a generic chef knife that yeah, I don't put too much thought into personalizing the names of them.
Now,
It's just I don't know, I'm not that connected to them.
with just pocket knives in general seem like to be the most commonly bought knife, if anything. It seems like that's what the easiest one people want, something they can fold and put on their hip or put in their pocket, it's kind of concealable. Why did you decide to just stick to, I mean, you don't make foldable knives.
No. The reason with foldable knives is like that's what I wanted to make from the start. It was just way more complicated than I wanted to get into in the beginning. There's a lot more precision that's involved, especially being like a former machinist. Like I know how to run machines at high tolerances. I worked jobs where I ran multi-million dollar machines. I would be too critical on the stuff I made if it was like shitty. Like if everything didn't line up right and I wasn't happy with how it all fit, I wouldn't like it. Um, it's just as a folding knife. So that's what kind of deterred me from those. But what really drew me to kitchen knives, like that's what I became most common um, using. Like I said, I worked in restaurants. I used a kitchen knife 8 hours a day for 3 or 4 years through high school and college. Like that's just what felt right when it came into knives. Um, and then as I made those for fun, like trying to figure it out, that's what people liked and saw, and so that's what most of my orders are for. I do have desires to like make other stuff. Like I said, I want to make a sword sometime this year. Folding knives at some point I'll figure it out, but like right now my clientele is like chefs and chef knife users, and that's what I still really enjoy making the most. So I kind of just keep rolling with it.
Do you find that, like, with just the community aspect of the knife scenario in general, do you find that you get good looks or bad looks from just average everyday people compared to, if you're going to a knife convention and you get to see so many people that are kind of doing the same thing, it's becoming more of a passion project. Like, so many people are becoming knife makers, glass blowers, all these jobs that were way back in the day, and now it's being revamped again just with the basic kind of essential just hobby interest in general. um, we're
Right.
spending more time as people being home, so more people are getting into a lot of old style crafts, instead of going out and like doing something else besides work. When you come home and you figure out like, oh shit, like we're living in this life now where there's so much more accessibility to be able to create things of this sort.
Yeah, I think that's also a really cool thing that's happening lately. Like there's a resurgence of like craft tools and like craftsmen, and it's with the internet and with social media now, it's becoming more prevalent. You see people making handmade stuff. I think like on a personal level, when it comes to, like interacting with other people, I get both kind of responses. I get people that don't understand it and like kind of think it's like a waste of time and weird. And then I get people that think it's awesome and want to see like all the stuff I make and want to come and see how working in my shop goes. But you get people that it's different for everyone, like what they think of it, which I mean, to each their own. But I think that this kind of new resurgence and like crafted stuff is really what we need right now. Trades are dying, which kind of blows, and that shouldn't be how it is. We need people doing
You said
everything,
you said
really.
trades are dying. What do you think that's a cause from? I feel like it has to do a little bit with like, yeah, we can use our phones to order supplies off Amazon or get cool ideas off the internet, but it seems like we're using it in a completely different direction that's actually eliminating a lot of old school hobbies or interests or just crafts in general.
Right. I think it well the way I was picturing it is like trades are dying in the more not colloquial sense, but the very broad sense of like you don't see a lot of people going into trades programs now. Most people go to college for their doctorates or their PhDs and masters, like all that kind of stuff. Whereas like you don't see a lot of people going in for like electricians and plumbers. Like those kind of trades are dying, and it trickles down to these more kind of niche, very artisan trades. Like you don't hear anything about metalwork in school. Like when I was in school, we cut all of our welding programs and fabrication stuff, and I had to go to a different school to learn any of that. Like our school systems have changed over the years of like what they kind of push more, and it's become more of like your sciences, your um, math, your like just the big major degrees that kind of take a long time to get, whereas trades are more of a quicker turnaround and just a different kind of work that people aren't used to anymore.
That really brings a realization kind of into the factor too. I took HVAC in school, and a lot of our funding and stuff was kind of brought in, like all our materials and stuff was brought in by our teacher on his own time, out of his own money. You know, scrap metal, all these things that we could use to, first of all, take apart, put back together. You know, just be able to get the basic learning processes. Because, like, remember when they started cutting funding in our school? What they did was they took out the agriculture stuff first, so they had to sell a lot of their like tools, tractors, all these things that they had. They ended up having to limit like the amount of really spending they could do when it comes to just being able to farm something, grow something. And then they started coming over to us. They started going over to carpentry. And I was like, I thought a trade job was the safe way to go. And my buddy's in HVAC now. He stuck with it after we graduated. And he's like, dude, it's like, you're always in need, but nobody's really hiring to do this anymore because of the weird way that we're going as a society now. It's like jobs are
Sure,
becoming more difficult to get unless you have a degree or you're going for a PhD, unless you're going for a doctorate. Where if you had a PhD or a master's license, you were immediately getting hired and getting paid twice as much, you know? But now it's like that's the bare minimum.
sure. Yeah, it's crazy. It's taken a weird shift. Because like the same thing you were saying, everything's like programs are cut. Like we had a whole welding shop in high school. The program was cut because they didn't want to pay the teacher to go take a class to get certified, and he was like down to do it on his own time, this and that. Like they just didn't care to put money back into these kind of programs. They wanted people going in to like STEM programs for engineering and math and physics and science, all those kind of things. And it's very weird how it takes so long for people to get these degrees, and really a lot of people have trouble finding jobs. At least, I mean, I'm 23. Most of my friends are graduating college or moving on to master's programs. Like you either have trouble finding a job, or like you spent your whole life in school, you don't know what to do unless you're set up pretty well in college to like get an internship that moves on to a job, or you get these good kind of situations lined up. Like it's kind of a crapshoot after you graduate college, at least in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I mean, that's 100% true, I think. I mean, I went to college because I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. And I just figured, oh, every time someone asks somebody, hey, you're what are you doing? What's your job? I'm like, oh, I'm in school. That was always my answer. Oh, what are you gonna do when you get out? I have no fucking clue. Hopefully, I'll figure it out while I'm in here. And I got my associate's degree, and then I thought that was gonna open up doors for me. It didn't do shit, man. I got paid the same much as someone that didn't have a college degree. And then I'm like, what was the point of me getting that? And they're like, oh, well, you need a bachelor's now. I'm like, well, next time I get my bachelor's, if I go back for that, that's another couple of years. Then I get my bachelor's, you're going to tell me I need a master's. And then you're going to keep pushing it and pushing it until eventually we don't know what the hell we're doing. And now you're seeing people on the rise with this entrepreneur type society that we're kind of turning into. So many people are going home and making crafts, doing all these amazing things with creativity where it's becoming like a big spark again. But the problem is our job system hasn't figured out what that is yet. Our job system is still structured out like when we very first started, where we were supposed to be pumping out people that worked a 9 to 5 lifestyle. And now we're seeing in like, especially in 2020, that we're not really at that type of people anymore. We're all a little bit, crafting our own hours, doing our own things, making money off things that we want to start to do. And it throws a weird shift because we've adjusted a little bit, but it seems like the world's trying to keep us in this mindset of like, oh, you need to go to the factory and then you need to go home. They need to be back here the next day.
Yeah, it's very weird. It's a weird time we're in now. Like everything's kind of shifting in the world of like the working world, and it's you don't see people working in factories anymore. There's like a lot of robotic stuff. Like everything's mostly run automated, and it's you don't need as many human interactions now. Like I went to school for manufacturing. My job was to press buttons and program machines to do jobs. So I would sit, program a part, run it for 10 hours a day, and then do it the next day. And it was a monotonous cycle of like, okay, I went to school for this. This is what I thought I wanted to do, but it's not. It's definitely not what I wanted to do. And I think that's the realization people figure out like once they get out of college, like, oh, I thought I wanted to do this, but maybe I don't. But I spent 6 years studying it, so I probably just should, right? And I feel like you find people that don't know what to do or they're really unhappy in what they're doing. And like our society doesn't really know how to interact with that yet. It's all very messy in my opinion, you know.
With just your kind of craft in general, do you want to turn this into a full-on business? Maybe sell your own knives at a store or something?
So I do this full time. I just sell through Instagram. In a store, I mean, I do work with retailers that buy and sell my knives. I really just want to keep pursuing um, metal work in different ways. So, like right now, I work out of a little shed. It's little, like I say, little. It's not that small. It's pretty spacious for what I do. But I'm right now, like my next goal is to find my own space to work. So my own space to kind of convert into a full metal shop. Because I want to start doing like more sculpture stuff. I think large scale projects would be very cool that I just can't do right now. The kind of space I'm working
What
in.
do we mean by
Um,
sculptures, though? We talking about like welding, a little bit of like just art pieces, or
yeah,
more of welding, just functional items?
both. I want to do some artistic stuff, and then I do want to get like to some different kind of furniture making, tables, chairs, stuff like that would be very fun. I think I just like the process of manipulating materials and turning them into something else. So if that would be sculpture, forging out some pieces, welding them, making some kind of either very abstract or have some kind of idea of what I want to make, and then with furniture, just mixing media, doing some wood and metal, metal and concrete, just different stuff that I think would be kind of complimentary. It would just be like fun to figure out. That would be like just for my own personal enjoyment, not so much as like a profitable side of business. Like I just like the aspect of exploring different ways to create stuff.
Plus, seeing those badass marble statues of like Greek gods and shit, like that always, when I saw that, I was like, first thing, obviously, you got to notice that his dick's out. Everybody, his dick's out. Hey, everybody, you're
Sure.
taking a
Yeah.
picture of Poseidon and his dick's out. But it
Sticks
was
out.
the interesting thing to see how this got crafted out too, because think how long ago those statues were made, and they're so perfectly defined in detail as well. And I don't know why every single one of them's fucking ripped.
Right? They're all projecting. They're all kind of like That's who they want to be.
Hades,
Small
put a
dicks,
shirt
big
on, damn it.
muscles. Yeah, yeah. But no, I'm like we have the DIA here in Detroit. It's a really nice art museum, but they have a bunch of different sculptures, marble sculptures and stuff like that, and you can just stare at them for hours, and you see like the rippling and like folding of clothes carved into marble. Everything is so smooth and very ornate, and it's like these are hundreds of thousands or yeah, hundreds of years old. How did they how do they find ways to do that with just hand tools? Like they're just using hammers and chisels and like scraping them down, but they find a way to make stuff way prettier than we probably could
I
now.
immediately start thinking that there's a dude making a statue, and then this one guy just goes, "Hey man, Jerry, hurry the hell up, man! You've been on that tit for 45 minutes. I got to make it perfect, man. All the edges, got to make it perfect." But there's a thing though, like it's a gift thing too, and a celebration aspect of also creating art, whether it's just through welding or doing something like giving a gift to somebody. If it's a knife, that custom tradition. Or I know there's a
Yeah.
statue that was given to us by Russia after 9/11, and it was this giant, like two giant metal walls, and there was a crack down the middle of it that was supposed to represent the two towers, but the crack down the middle is a teardrop.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. I think yeah, there's something to be said when you take time to make something and then give it to someone else. And, like we've done that since we were kids, right? You make your mom a macaroni card or something. But then as you progress, you can make these things like that sculpture that from Russia. Like that's a sentiment that, takes time and has thought put into it and has significant meaning. And that can't be replaced by simple gifts. And I think that stands true with most crafts and stuff.
Have you ever thought about using your blades in a more of a decorative art way instead of just making just a basic blade, but turning it into an art piece? There's a guy that was on a Joe Rogan podcast who uses his knives, and what he did was he set them up, kind of like the Expendables, that movie, that symbol with the skull in the middle.
Okay.
And he set them up like lined up around the side. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Knives Out yet.
No, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm familiar with like the big fan arc chair of knives or whatever
Yeah,
it
like
was.
that's something
Yeah.
badass to think that people can do that as well too. I mean, it's not good to have in a
Oh yeah.
house with like children and stuff, but I mean, it's interesting to look at.
No, but yeah, exactly. I mean I'd be down to kind of experiment with any kind of way. Like I probably wouldn't do that with my knives because it takes way longer to make them. But like with if I was doing it out of like simple materials and like not putting as much time into each knife, yeah, I would find a way to make that sculpture kind of work knives into some kind of sculpture would be a really cool concept.
Now, if we were going to create a knife, how would we go along this process?
You and I,
Yeah.
so I'd want first off, I'd want some kind of idea of what you're looking for, whether it would be like a chef knife or
Well, let's try
if you're looking for a
and
hunting
think
knife.
of a good idea for a knife, because me and you are about to create one. So that means what you want and what I
Okay,
want as well.
cool, cool, cool.
So, what are the
So
basics we start with?
So tell me what you're looking for a little bit, how you want to use it, if there's any kind of materials or colors or um, concepts you want this knife to represent. If you have something um, that you want it to like look after, like if you have a car, it's like a cool color, you want your knife to kind of match your car, whatever it might be. Tell me something of like what you have in mind right now of how you want your knife
I
to
want
look.
something that looks ancient, something that you pulled out of like
Okay.
King Arthur's round table or something. And I also want, if I'm in a zombie apocalypse and I need to eat somebody, we got a blade for it.
We got a blade for it. Okay, cool. So what I would say, if you want something Arthurian and ancient, we could go with a little bit of a dagger, right? We'll go short dagger, maybe let's say 7 inches, decent sized blade, not tiny for stabbing, more for an ornate piece. But what we'll do is to get that ancient look, we can take it, do some patina work on it, either stonewash it to make it look like it's come out of dirt and gravel, or we could rub it up with different kind of chemicals that make it look pitted that doesn't actually deteriorate the surface. Um, something dark and ancient looking for the handle, there's things called bog oak, which, if you're familiar with Arthurian legend, Excalibur came from the Lady of the. It's either Lady of the Lake or Lady of the River, but bog oak is a wood that comes out of uh, bogs, marshes in Russia that's thousands of years old, and it has this worn, ancient feel to
Yeah,
it.
it's like a weathered look to it.
Yeah, it's like a deep kind of textured, weathered look. So we do that. We do a nice ornate dagger, and then to carve up something if we need to, you just put a nice ass edge on it. A pretty straight blade will take nice even slices and be able to chop pretty well. Not chop, but slice pretty well. Um, and I think that hits both of your marks of something that looks pretty ancient, something that looks pretty badass, and that can do work if we need it to.
I'd buy it. $29.99, and
Oh
if you
yeah.
call right now, we'll drop it down to $6.99 and throw in 200 more knives on top of it. It's like, oh shit.
Yeah, just add a bunch of zeros on the end of those numbers and you got a deal.
I see. When it comes to knives, though, like they do tell a story in a way. Like I know people that have had
Hmm.
knives for years. Like I saw my grandfather's knife that he used in Vietnam, and he
Hmm.
pulled it out and showed me like this is what got him through some situations and scenarios where he had to learn how to kind of survive a little bit while he was out there. And just looking at it and
Yeah.
holding it felt like it told me a story. It felt like I could see the weathered in the experience, like it took a piece of that memory home into the knife.
Right. You can tell from like the way that handle's probably worn down or the way the blade looks that that was definitely a knife that was used for multiple things that kept this man safe and kept him like helped him survive. And you definitely can feel that in certain pieces. Like when you get a new knife, you can tell like this is just something shiny and new, and you might have that little hesitation to use it. But when you have something that's definitely been weathered by different experiences and stuff, you can feel that immediately. It has that kind of feel when you uh, get your hands on it. That's like, okay, this is a tool that was used to do a lot of work.
Yeah, something you can't manufacture too. Like you can try and make it look as old and as, worn down as possible, but it's still like when you hold it, there's just some feeling to it where it's like this knife has still got its whole life ahead of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really do appreciate you coming out and doing the podcast, Nico. I want to give you here a minute at the end kind of to promote your content too. So people can first of all find your knives and then find the next commercial you're making to sell these knives, because I know you got to make a commercial.
Yeah, man. So on all platforms, I'm at Nicolaides Knives. Instagram and Facebook are really the only two I use. Um, I don't know if I should bother spelling that if you have a link, but uh, Nicolaides knives. Um, and it's just me sharing work. If you want to just check out some cool looking knives, I'd love for you to head on over. You don't have to buy a piece, but I just like sharing what I do and hope that some people enjoy looking at them. Really.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.